Okay, it is 8 o'clock East, so let's get started. I'm going to make a couple little quick technical announcements, and then I'm going to kind of overview the agenda for tonight, and then I will introduce our speakers and we'll jump right in. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. This is our second in a series of webinars or web briefings about Christian Zionism. It's a topic that our members are clearly very interested in because we're getting very high registration rates on these web briefings. So we're excited to talk more about the topic with Jonathan and Jonathan. If you just logged in, you would probably notice that you are muted. That's because we have so many folks on the call that we want to limit the background noise. So we cannot hear you, but you can hear us, hopefully. If you have anything that you'd like to add to the conversation or a question that you want to pose to the speakers to address after their presentation or after our guided discussion, then please use the chat function. And you can do that by taking your mouse and either going to the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have it set up. And a little menu should pop down or pop up, and you should see either there you'll see like a little chat icon, and that's how you can open up the chat box. Or you might have to click where it says more. You'll see 3 little dots, and then it says more. And you can open that up, and you'll see chat as an option, and that will open up the chat box. And I will be monitoring that as best I can and trying to keep track of questions as they come in so I can pose them to the Jonathans towards the end of our time. Also, please, if you haven't yet, use that chat box to say hi and where you're joining us from, because it's really great to see where everybody is. And I did mention, but I'll say one more time, that we are recording, and we're going to be sharing this out with folks who registered but couldn't make it tonight, and we'll also put it up on our members-only section on our website. If you, it's jvp.org/webinars. If you don't have access to that or are a member and don't have the password, just let me know, send me an email, and I can get that for you. But if you registered, you'll be getting this recording. Okay, so let's jump in. I want to do a quick introduction of our speakers. We have 2 Jonathans with us tonight. Oh, I should say, sorry, first, I'm Sam Brotman. I'm the membership manager at Jewish Voice for Peace. And one of the things I get to do as part of my job is help put on discussions and presentations and briefings from experts in various fields related to Israel and Palestine. And so tonight we have 2 great ones with us, Jonathan Brenneman and Jonathan Kutab. Jonathan Kutab is a leading human rights lawyer in Israel and Palestine. He grew up in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. But after the Six-Day War, his family moved to the United States. After practicing with a Wall Street law firm for several years, he returned home to co-found the Palestinian Center for the Study of Nonviolence, Al-Haq, the premier Palestinian human rights organization, and the Mandela Institute for Political Prisoners. He is licensed to practice law in Palestine, Israel, and New York, and serves on the board of the Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center in Jerusalem and the Bethlehem Bible College. And so we'll be hearing more from Jonathan Kutab here shortly. And then we have Jonathan Brenneman, who is a Palestinian-American consultant and trainer in nonviolent social change, anti-oppression, and direct action, alongside his coworker and wife, Sarah. Jonathan is from the Great Lakes watershed, growing up in St. Mary's, Ohio, which is traditional Shawnee land. He has undergraduate degrees in history and philosophy from Huntington University and completed a master's at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies in 2016. That program included a 6-month internship in Cape Town with Ndifuna Ukwazi, an activist research organization which fights for more just land policies. Before going to Notre Dame, Jonathan was part of Christian Peacemaker Team's Palestine Project in Hebron, or Al-Khalil, where he worked in solidarity with Palestinian communities to challenge unjust Israeli policies and the structures that uphold them. He continues his advocacy in the United States, primarily through challenging Christian Zionist theology. And Jonathan is currently traveling through Southeast Asia after completing a Rotary Peace Fellowship in Bangkok, Thailand. So it's actually morning for Jonathan B. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
So I'm going to stop the presentation for a second so you can meet our speakers by their faces. Really quick, Jonathan Kutab, let's start with you. Can you just wave and say hello?
Hello, how are you?
Thank you so much for being with us. And then Jonathan B, can you wave and say hello?
Hi, everyone. Good to be with you this morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you're at.
Yeah. Great. So now we're going to basically take the next 30 minutes. I'm going to pose 3 different questions to you two. And each question we've kind of blocked off 10 minutes for the two of you to talk about it. It's not super structured. They haven't prepared a presentation per se, but we want to take about 10 minutes per question. And that will leave us hopefully plenty of time at the end for Q&A and discussion with the participants. So let's just dive right in. The first question is kind of a two-parter. How have progressive Christians in Palestine responded to Christian Zionism, and vice versa? How have Christian Zionists, in your experience, responded to progressive Christians that are opposing Christian Zionism? And so I'll open that up to whoever wants to speak first.
Jonathan, or shall I?
You got it.
For Palestinian Christians across the spectrum in all denominations, the whole phenomenon of Christian Zionism was very negative, was very hostile. It almost negated our existence. They ignored the fact that Palestinians even existed. And for many of us, we look at the scripture, we look at the Bible, and we find no support and no basis for Christian Zionism. In fact, a document was prepared, the Kairos document, where we spelled out how we felt Christianity responds to the crisis and to Christian Zionism. We repudiate it as basically as a heresy, as a political attempt to utilize and weaponize the scripture and the Bible, to use concepts that really are not, in my view, even Christian, and sometimes some would argue not even Jewish, to justify a very ethnocentric, territorially based view that is just doesn't reflect the modern reality, doesn't reflect the modern beliefs of either Jews or Christians. So Palestinian Christians certainly have said, we want to have nothing to do with this. This is not Christianity. This is using the Bible and God's word in ways that are totally contrary to our faith. It harps back to certain periods in the Old Testament which are problematic for even Jews or Christians today, where conquest of the land and ethnically cleansing all other tribes in their way. So it's not really a relevant theological or ethical point of view for us. So I would say Christians generally, of all denominations, have made it very clear that they are opposed to Christian Zionists.
Just jump in real quick with a question because it seems directly related to what you were just talking about. Someone was asking if the Kairos document is easily available.
Yes, you can get it online. K-A-I-R-O-S, Kairos. And it refers to basically a similar document that was prepared by very progressive people in the church in South Africa, where they laid out the theological basis for confronting and repudiating apartheid and racism within that context as well.
Great, thank you. Someone put it, the link in the chat, so you can find that there.
Somebody put it on the chat, Kairos, Palestine.
Great, yeah.
Thanks, Karen.
And Kairos also refers to, it's a Greek term that refers to an important or like a pregnant moment in time where in South Africa, they said, like, it's time for the churches to step up. It's a holy moment. And now we're saying in Palestine, it's a holy moment where it's time for people of any faith to stand up for what they believe, because we're at a point where it's between life and death for Palestinians. And we need people of faith, and especially Christian, this is a Christian to Christian document. We need them to stand up for what is right and what they believe. And in the US, a lot of church denominations have responded. But I think it's important, especially as I'm in Southeast Asia right now, to name that Christian Zionism is not only a US phenomenon, but it has become a global phenomenon, radiating out from the US, especially by well-funded evangelical mission agencies. In the United States, there are televangelists and megachurches with major budgets that are pumping out this toxic ideology, not only in the US, but all over the world. And it's so prevalent in the US that any work by Christians or within church denominations for Palestinian rights is going to have to confront Christian Zionism. And thankfully, there are a lot of grassroots organizations that are currently challenging Christian Zionism within American churches. A few examples of these are Friends of Sabeel. Sabeel was mentioned in Jonathan Katab's introduction. It's the Palestinian Liberation Theology Center. And Friends of Sabeel seeks to connect folks with Palestinian liberation theology, reminding them that there are forms of Christianity that haven't been taken over by Christian Zionism. Another organization is Churches for Middle East Peace, which provides resources on Palestine specifically designed for Christians. An organization called Telos is actually specifically targeting and speaking to evangelical Christians who are the most Christian Zionist. I'll share a link to some of those websites here with you all. And also, people within church denominations are organizing within their own denomination around this.
Yeah. I'd like to make something clear that while Christian Zionism is not a new phenomenon, those of you who have attended the previous webinar got a little bit of a history of how this phenomenon started and how it dovetailed with British colonial thinking at that time, and through the Schofield Bible, how its views were promulgated. What is, I think, of special interest to JVP is that Christian Zionism not only speaks about the state of Israel and tries to revive an Old Testament paradigm for the Jewish people and for the Promised Land and for the conquest of the Promised Land, but it also has an end times portion. It looks at the creation of the state of Israel, the gathering together of the Jews there, as part of God's plan for the end times, so that all the Jews will be gathered in one place where they will all be killed, except for a small portion who will convert to Christianity and be saved by Jesus at the end times. So this kind of apocalyptic end times theology is definitely part of Christian Zionism, and it has been of great appeal to people, mostly not because of its theological value or its spiritual value or its moral value, but because it's an exciting way to see the end times happening. We're about to see the end of the world, and this is proof of it through the Christian Zionism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And have you seen much on the flip side of the equation? Have you seen or heard about Christian Zionists responding to things like the Kairos document and progressive organizing in the Christian community?
Yes, we have actually, because the minute somebody stands up to a Christian Zionist and says, okay, what about those people who are Christians, who are Palestinians, and who can speak your language and who pray and worship the same way you do? Where do they fit in? Many times they say, well, they have to give up their Palestinianism if they want to be real Christians. That's the kindest way. Mostly it's just dismissive. God has a plan for the end of the world, and the Palestinians are sort of a small, insignificant part in that equation. The truth is that most Christian Zionists have never met a Palestinian, aren't even aware that there are Palestinian Christians, don't know their Bible very well, and they don't know current affairs very well either. All they have is a Hollywood version of, the world is about to come to an end. The state of Israel, its creation is proof that God exists and that the Bible is true. And it's our job to help bring about the end of the world, which will create a great salvation for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And whenever people in the U.S. are trying to organize, especially in churches for Palestinian rights, Christian Zionists will come up with the excuse that those people are necessarily anti-Semitic. I mean, this is a strategy that I'm sure others have heard as well. So, for example, in the organizing that a group of us did within the Mennonite Church to try to raise up a resolution for the church to divest from Israeli war crimes in the occupation, or from profiteers of the Israeli occupation. The resolution very quickly got twisted, claiming that this would offend Jews and therefore was necessarily anti-Semitic. It's part of what Mark Ellis calls the ecumenical deal. So one of the ways that we as organizers responded to this is because Christian Zionists were trying to frame it as we were the ones that were anti-Semitic, and that because of their pro-Israel theology, it made them pro-Jewish. We wanted to show that that was obviously false. Christian Zionism actually bypasses wrestling with the deep-seated anti-Semitism that is within Christianity. So for us, we wanted to challenge Christian Zionism by actually dealing with anti-Semitism, and by doing so in a way that didn't negate our stance for Palestinian rights, but actually bolstered getting our church to deal not only with anti-Semitism, but with anti-Arab bigotry and anti-Muslim bigotry as well, and to work for Palestinian rights. Now, that was a very difficult needle to thread. But as people who are challenging the oppression and racism against Palestinians, it was really important for us to look intersectionally with other marginalized groups. So we teamed up with people working on indigenous rights, people doing anti-racism work, and those who worked on Jewish relations in the church that also had an intersectional analysis. And we came up with a new resolution that had two parts. One that very clearly opposed the Israeli occupation and worked for a just peace in Israel-Palestine, and another that called for the church to challenge anti-Semitism and build up relationships with Jewish communities. And after putting that out and with a well-organized campaign at the grassroots level, there was hardly any opposition to a resolution in the Mennonite Church that passed with 98% approval. And in the next years, we set up a lot of structures to implement both parts of that resolution. So for us, the key for facing Christian Zionist false accusations that standing up for Palestinian rights is anti-Semitic was to speak clearly against anti-Semitism. And this is very hard for Christian Zionists to do because, as Jonathan Katab pointed out, Christian Zionism is at its core anti-Semitic. And what we are working on, the dismantling of all isms, equality and liberation for all people, is the true good news.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. Christian Zionists traditionally, even before the State of Israel was created, showed some very clear anti-Semitism. They really didn't like Jewish people, and they really didn't think that God, John Hagee clearly said it. God doesn't answer the prayers of Jewish people. He also even said that the whole Holocaust was God's work, partly to punish the Jews and partly to bring about the solution of the creation of the State of Israel. I think most Christian Zionists really don't know many Jews and they don't know many Palestinians, and have shown very little interest and empathy and love for either group. But they are caught up in their own theology and their end times theology, which is why I think it is very easy to, on the one hand, manipulate them, on the other hand, to really convert them, change them, address them, talk to them. Christian Zionism works mostly when there is no discussion, no political discussion, no theological discussion. They just have a few verses of scripture that they quote, usually out of context, and that's it. God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. When they really deal with people who, and they get to know people, Palestinians or Jews, and what they are struggling with, all of a sudden the whole conversation changes. In my experience, that's been the case. At Bethlehem Bible College, which is an evangelical institution in Bethlehem, we set up a series of conferences called Christ at the Checkpoint, where we try to challenge Christian Zionists and others, Messianic Jews, whoever that disagreed with us theologically or politically. We invited them to an open discussion in light of the current reality. And the results have been amazing. Either people have changed their mind, or sometimes they just totally boycotted us and refused to engage in a discussion with us. And some of them, we've had some very good cases of reconciliation, understanding, and empathy back and forth. And this is something that we are very pleased with and very proud of. Christian Zionists are, for the most part, good, decent people who don't know their theology, who don't know their scriptures, and who don't know the realities on the ground. And they need to be educated and confronted with the reality rather than opposed and vilified.
Great. Well, you've sort of touched on this already, and it dovetails kind of nicely into the next question. Before I do that, I do just want to say, while you were talking, it was just brought to my attention that this meeting had a limit of 100 people on it. So I've been getting dozens of emails from people saying they want in and they haven't been able to get in. So while you're answering the next question, I'm going to try to tell them that I fixed it and that they can get in. But if you're one of the people who just joined, I'm very sorry about that. Thank you for joining late. That was my fault. This is being recorded, and we will share it out with folks who weren't able to make it. So the next question is related to what you were talking about, but it's more on the personal level about your experience, what your experience has been as Palestinian Christians or Palestinian American Christians when speaking with or challenging Christian Zionists. How has that been received? What have been the responses you've heard? Anything that you want to share about how that has been as a personal experience?
Well, I started doing that. Let me elaborate a little bit more. You need to understand that most, not all, Christian Zionists tend to be evangelical. And the one thing about evangelical people is that they are usually literalists when it comes to the Bible. They take the Bible quite literally, and it is important that they be addressed with biblical texts. Otherwise, to tell them international law and morality and geopolitical considerations and human rights are really not significant arguments for them. You need to show them from Scripture that their positions are not correct and that they need to look at other things. In my view, whenever that is done, you can have some very good positive results because by and large, many of them are very decent and good people. What has happened is that there are some secular or Jewish Zionists who don't share their evangelical faith, but who found it very useful to use Christian Zionism to obtain from them political support, even military and financial support. David Ben-Gurion famously said, "I don't believe in God, but I believe he gave us this land." So many secular Zionists who probably ridicule the faith of evangelical Christians are very glad to get them to use their support in Congress or to get them to pressure the administration to do certain things that they want from a political basis. As you well know, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was done largely to please Christian Zionists or evangelicals. It was not something that Netanyahu wanted or AIPAC was really trying very hard to get. But Christian Zionists felt that this was wonderful. This brings the second coming of Jesus a little closer. This brings the end times about. Because there's one verse in Scripture which says, "Jerusalem shall be trodden by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled." So some of the Christian Zionists said, aha, that means that when Jerusalem is officially ruled by Jews, the time of the Gentiles is finished and we are at the end times. The end times are here. So we must promote Jewish rule over Jerusalem because that brings about the end times. I know for people who don't share that view, it sounds a little bit wacky, but you need to deal with it. You need to deal with the fact that there are some people who haven't been to Jerusalem, who don't understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in any way, shape, or form, but who say, wow, the Bible said it. For 2,000 years, Jerusalem has been ruled by Gentiles, and now all of a sudden, it's going to be ruled by Jews, which means the times of the Gentiles is finished, which means Christ is about to come again. Go figure.
Yeah. And just going off of what Jonathan Katab was saying, Christian Zionism can be really hard to talk about or to analyze because on the one hand, you start talking about these wacky ideas and it sounds like a marginalized group with these extremist ideas. And I think Christian Zionism at its center, at its core, is an extremist ideology. But on the other hand, it's an extremely popular ideology in the U.S. and an extremely powerful ideology in the U.S. You look at U.S. policy towards Israel, and now so even more, Israeli policy itself seems to be most in line with what U.S. Evangelical Christian Zionists want to see happen than any other group. The move of the embassy that Jonathan Katab talked about, even the national law. Christian Zionists are the only group in the U.S. where the majority wants to see Israel be a Jewish state over a democratic state. So having these two different understandings can make it difficult to analyze Christian Zionism. But as Jonathan was saying, most Christian Zionists don't realize that their ideology is hateful. They want to be good Christians who love their neighbor, but they've just been told by their religious leaders as well as politicians that Israel is the good guys that they need to support. So it's not just a theological ideology, but it's one that is mixed very deeply with the U.S. American political narrative as well. So it's just become part of this evangelical conservative Christian package. For some, it is held centrally, that being pro-Israel, that Israel being a fulfillment of biblical prophecy is like center to their faith. And we've definitely interacted with those kind of people. There's someone who I was talking about, they had traveled to Israel, Palestine, and I said, oh, I'm from there. And they're like, oh, you're Jewish. And I was like, well, actually, Palestinian Christian. And they literally just turned and walked away from me. Like that's happened to all of us, Palestinian Christians or Palestinians at one time or another. But for every time that has happened, I've had conversations with people who are like, who will engage and say, wow, we never knew. Thank you for telling us this. Or we knew there was always something off with what we had been taught, and we never really looked into it until now. And that's the much more common story that I have of engaging with evangelical Christians and with engaging with Christian Zionists. It's a very, very broadly held belief, but it's not a very deeply held belief. And this is how I think all extremist ideologies work. They work off of ignorance. They work off of people not knowing very much about Israel, about Palestine, about Israelis or Palestinians, or modern day Jews in Judaism and what those beliefs are. Judaism has to stay in its first century form for their ideology to work. So actually meeting Jews, or as well, even more so than meeting Palestinians, meeting Jews that don't share their ideology would be incredibly disruptive for their ideology in a way that would allow them to open up and think differently about what's going on in Israel-Palestine.
Okay. That brings us into question number 3.
Yes, thank you. So I was just going to say, it's a perfect transition. Go for it. The question is, what role do you see for JVP members in challenging Christian Zionism?
It's really important to understand that for most Christian Zionism, they are fixated on the Old Testament in the Christian Bible. So that all the changes that Jesus brought about as a Jewish rabbi, as well as all the changes that other rabbis in the Jewish tradition brought about, are totally absent from these people's understanding. You know, at the Jewish Seder, you do the Dayenu, and you drip a few drops of wine because your joy at redemption is mixed with sorrow for the firstborn of the Egyptians who are killed. This type of ethical, moral, broader, universal feelings within Judaism are totally lost on Christian Zionists. Just as the teachings of Jesus, who says, my kingdom is not of this world, and that if you are children of Abraham, you'd be doing the works of Abraham. It's not your bloodline, but it's your faith that counts, that God's love is open to everyone, is not limited to one tribe. This type of more progressive, more universal, more ethical development is totally lost on Christian Zionists. They're still back with Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down, with the need to totally annihilate Amalek, with a kind of very militant view of what Judaism is. That it's you go in, you conquer the land, you obliterate everybody else because God is on your side and you're victorious. And to try and sit and tell them no, even within the Old Testament, there were prophets who were saying, you need to obey God, otherwise you lose the land, or you will be exiled from the land. That the promise of the land is not a real estate deed that you won that because God gave to you. He wants you to live a certain ethical and moral life according to his commandments, otherwise you lose. You don't just take the land and it's yours and thank you very much, it is mine, everybody move out of my way, God is with me, I can do anything I want. Yeah, so this kind of understanding either of Christianity or of modern Judaism is totally lost on Christian Zionists. And the state of Israel isn't interested in teaching them this. They're saying just rah, give us more weapons, support us, protect us from international law and all these international ideas which are wrong, because God gave us this land and we want to do whatever we want because God gave us this particular favor. So in my view, JVP members have one task to explain to Christian Zionism that this is not how we view the Jewish faith. Never mind the Christian faith. Never mind what Jesus said in the New Testament. We as Jews today do not follow that type of very tribal, very territorial, very militant view. We have developed, we've gone beyond that. This is not where we're at. That our views, our claim, whatever it is, historical or religious, isn't based on divine power that dismisses everybody else and favors us. And I can't speak for Jews. I can speak for Christians. And I can speak what Jesus said and what the early church said and what Christianity teaches. But Jews have to understand that Christian Zionism also distorts Judaism, not just distorts Christianity.
Jonathan B., was there anything you wanted to add to that question?
Absolutely. JVP's mission talks about how it is against anti-Muslim, Arab, and anti-Jewish bigotry. And so it's really exciting to see JVP asking these questions about Christian Zionism, because by challenging Christian Zionism, you're challenging all three of those things. And JVP and its members are in such an excellent position to challenge Christian Zionism. The organization has already taken a big risk in challenging Jewish Zionism, and comparatively, challenging Christian Zionism will actually be much easier. While JVP recognized the difficulty in bringing up Zionism within Jewish communities, wisely noting the discussion's possible touch on deep trauma of Jewish people and fear, Christian Zionism doesn't hold that kind of gravitas among evangelicals. Because, as we said before, Christian Zionism is a widely held belief, but it's not a deeply held belief by the majority of Christian Zionists. And people in JVP won't need to be worried about being called, or it's very unlikely that members of JVP will be called self-hating for challenging Christian Zionism, because it's not a critique that Christian Zionists can easily use. It's one thing to have an internal debate about Jewish identity. It's another for a Christian to dismiss a Jewish person for not fitting into their anti-Semitic concept of Judaism or the Jewish people. Also, as we said before, since Christian Zionism is based on ignorance, if a Christian Zionist actually hears from a Jewish person that doesn't approve of their theology, it would be a major challenge to them. And Jews have access to Christian Zionists in ways that others don't, because you all are the chosen people. You're the beloved, according to them. But you're not insiders because you're not born-again, Bible-believing Christians. So it puts you in a unique position to challenge their paradigm by not fitting into their neatly constructed boxes. And the more exposure of Christian Zionism's anti-Semitism will make the codependent relationship that Christian Zionists currently have with Israeli settlers, Israeli politicians, and U.S. Jewish establishment organizations much harder to justify. I mean, right now, John Hagee, who we've already talked about his extremely anti-Semitic ideas, he's been awarded by the ADL. You know, why is that? And why has no one challenged this yet? I mean, there's so much that members of JVP and JVP itself could do in challenging Christian Zionism. I'm imagining protests outside of Christian United for Israel gatherings, or challenging elected officials to distance themselves from problematic figures like John Hagee that are at the center of Christian Zionism, or merely educating activists on the role that Christian Zionism has on U.S. policy, or reporting Christian Zionists, reporting the anti-Semitism of Christian Zionists, or just the simple fact of exposing nominal Christian Zionists to actual Jewish people, as well as educating Jewish communities on the dangers of Christian Zionism. And just at its core, exposing Christian Zionists' anti-Semitic, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim and anti-peace theology and political projects.
Yeah, this is a very important point. Christian Zionists necessarily would oppose any kind of peace plan, because peace suggests that you have to compromise and give away territory that God gave to you, that you need to share Jerusalem, which should be yours alone. In fact, Christian Zionists believe that not only should you annex all the West Bank, but you should also annex portions of the East Bank, because 2.5 tribes were promised land east of the Jordan. So for them to even, you know, there was one Christian Zionist, I don't know if it was Hagee or somebody else, who suggested that God cursed Sharon, and that he went into a coma precisely because he gave up Gaza. He gave up portions of Gaza. That's part of Eretz Israel that God gave to you. How dare you give it over to somebody else? So in their twisted theology, if you work for peace, you're working against God's will and God's plan. So I think JVP people ought to say, wait a minute, this is not where we're at. Your political positions are very right-wing, are very destructive, are very hurtful to us and to our people and to our faith. Not just your particular twisted interpretation of the Bible and of end times, really, and you want us all to be gathered to be slaughtered, all of us, except for about 144,000 who will convert to Christianity and be saved in the end times, but everybody else will be slaughtered and killed. And you think that's good? You think that's something you want to promote? And you think you're doing us a favor? You see, this kind of thing, I think only a Jewish person can tell to the Christian Zionists. That look, your theology isn't doing us any favors. Yes, you're sending us more weapons, and yes, you are giving us political support, but this is not really what we need. This is not really what we want. We want peace. We want justice. We want reconciliation. We want to find a way to live with the Palestinians, not to totally obliterate them. So when we see somebody who is hateful, who hates Muslims, who hates Arabs, who probably hates Jews also, it doesn't help us very much that he's willing to support Netanyahu and his policies.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Absolutely. Christian Zionism is using Jews and Judaism for their own racist, political, and theological ends and to propagate their political ideas. So as members of an organization inspired by the Jewish tradition, you have the support, you have the strategy, and you have the power to combat this evil ideology. So let's continue to work together. Reach out if you need help. Yeah, we're all in this together.
Thank you. So let's move to our Q&A for our last 14 minutes. I've been trying to catch the questions as they come in to the chat. I do just want to, I saw that about more than 50 new people joined the webinar since I opened it up late. So if you're one of those people, I'm very sorry again about the mix up. We're going to do some Q&A now, and I also am going to share in the chat the link to our first webinar on Christian Zionism, which was more of a 101 what it is kind of a discussion. So let's get to the questions, and then I'll share that link in the chat, so keep your eye on that. The first question that I saw in the chat was around that evangelical Christians were claiming that the Zionist project serves Christians because it could signal or trigger the beginning of the second coming. How do Christian anti-Zionists respond to that theologically?
Well, theologically, there are clear verses in scriptures that says nobody knows the time and of the end when it comes. There is also a long tradition within the Christian churches, going back all the way to the time of the Apostle Paul, all the way up to here. In every age, there has been somebody who says, it's about to happen, we're living in the end times, this is the final generation. The part of Christian theology is that we need to live in constant anticipation and expectation of the end times, but that we can never know when it's going to happen. And anybody who claims that they know, and they tell you the world is going to end in such and such a year, such and such a time, has been proven false again and again and again and again and again. And they keep just shifting the goalposts. That's one way that I try to deal with it, that a prophetic position is not just a prediction of the future, but rather it's a call to justice. It's a call to people to turn away from their sins. Otherwise, God will punish you. There is a future element of God's punishment if you don't follow his commandments. And that's found in the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament.
Yeah, there's a lot of theological work being done around this, from stuff that Gary and Don were talking about in the first webinar, to Palestinian Christian liberation theology, to folks working on watershed theology, watershed discipleship that sees everywhere as the Holy Land and gets out of this place-based Christianity and racially based Christianity, really, as well as, besides just theological work, though, as we said, Christian Zionism, though it is a theology, is so much more based in politics, in my opinion. So you can challenge Christian Zionism on theological grounds, but what I found far more effective is just telling people about the actual realities in Israel-Palestine, and the theology will follow. So it's really good that we have theological alternatives to Christian Zionism to show people. People in the chat have been talking about the book Chosen by Walter Brueggemann is a great one to offer to folks that are looking for theological answers to this. Gary Burge's books are great for people that are looking for theological answers to this. But usually the theology follows people having a realization about what's happening in Israel-Palestine. So yes, absolutely, there's a lot of work to be done theologically and a lot of amazing theologians doing that. But I think that's only a small piece of the puzzle when it comes to confronting Christian Zionism.
Great. There was a sort of historical question here asking if Christian Zionism dates back to, I said Noam Chomsky dates Christian Zionism back to the 19th century. Is this correct? I'm sure, I actually think it goes back further, but curious what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I would refer to your first webinar. You have it right there on the screen because it deals with the history of Christian Zionism, the Scofield Bible, and others who started it. But I think, yeah, it dates back at least to the 19th and 18th century.
I would say it depends on how we're defining Christian Zionism. If you look for like that particular term, it comes about in about the mid 19th century, before even Jewish Zionism, really, before Herzl. But it has strands that go very, very deep in Christianity. Some have pulled it back to around the time of the Reformation. Some have pulled it back even further within Christian history, as you said, back to the 9th century. It's the strand of colonial Christianity. It's the same theological readings that said that talked about manifest destiny and doctrine of discovery, that Christians had the right to take over land because Christians were the new chosen people. It was how North America was colonized by Europeans. It was how South Africa was part of how South Africa was colonized by Europeans. And there's just kind of this shift in who are the chosen people, who are the people that are disposable. And that is unfortunately a very deep strand in Christian history, going back to, like we said, the 9th century or even before, when Christianity became part of empire. And so part of our work, Jonathan Katab's and mine, as Palestinian Christians, is to remind Christians of a Christianity before it was part of empire. Back when it was in Palestine, and when it was still nonviolent, when it was still working on behalf of the oppressed. And of course, there are those strains that have also been maintained throughout Christianity, usually at the margins. Similar to how Jewish Voice for Peace is always at the margins, Christian Voices for Peace have been at the margins, but are always there, are always strong, always trying to call the religion back to the best parts of it, to the parts that are for liberation, to the parts that are for peace.
Great. The next question is sort of it's an opinion more than a fact-based answer that we're looking for, but there's a question about why you think the end times theology is seductive. Excuse me. They don't understand. The asker was saying, "I don't understand why the end of the world is exciting."
Easy, for the same reason that people read their horoscopes. People like to know the future. People think that if they can have a window into knowing the future, somehow they have a leg up on everybody else. Why do people look at horoscopes? It doesn't make sense to me, but people take that seriously. Now, especially if you are told that the events that you see on your television screen proves that the Bible is correct. So it sort of supports your faith. It shows that God is still there. They also yearn back to a God of the Old Testament, a militaristic God who comes in and destroys all his enemies by fire and gets rid of them and gives his blessing directly to people. People like that. People think that they can participate in that. It's different from the lamentations of the prophets. It's different from the moral agonizing over right and wrong. It's different from Christ's commandment to turn the other cheek and to love you. It's not. It's a macho view of false view of religion. That's why I say it's basically a heresy more than a theology. It's a heresy that appeals to people at a very, very superficial level. It doesn't work when they sit down and talk. When you sit down and talk with somebody who knows the Bible, when you sit down with somebody who knows the situation on the ground, and you see the situation on the ground, and you see the people, and you see the agony of the struggle for justice and for peace, then you can't very well continue to believe in Christian Zionism.
Great. We only have a couple of minutes, so I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions. Very sorry about that, but that just means we're going to have you back. There's a question about money flowing into Israel from U.S. Christian organizations. The question being, do you happen to have figures, or do you have a sense for the amount of money that goes into Israel from U.S. Christian organizations, maybe even versus Jewish organizations? And if you do, even if you don't have those exact figures, do you have a sense for what that looks like?
Yeah, there was a rabbi who passed away recently whose specialty was to collect money on behalf of Israel mostly from Christians in the United States. And it was claimed that he collected $1.3 billion. I forgot the name of the rabbi. He had an organization called Christians and Jews for Israel, or something like that. That's the figure that comes to my mind that I heard. Actually, it's more than just the money. It's the influence that they use. For many years, we've known that the power of AIPAC was from the grassroots, that they could get a lot of Christian Zionists to send letters to Congress at the time when letters to Congress were viewed as being very effective, much more so than mega bucks through super PACs. So the power over Congress that AIPAC was wielding had its roots in a lot of Christian Zionists who are willing to contact their member of Congress and to say, hey, you have to support Israel. It is our duty as Christians. We think that God will bless us if we bless Israel. You know, in Genesis, where God says to Abraham, I will bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. I'll make thee a great nation, and through your seed will all the nations of the world be blessed. This is one of the verses that Christian Zionists use all the time. And they say this refers to the state of Israel, and blessing the state of Israel means supporting it financially, economically, politically, militarily, voting, making sure people vote in Congress with whatever Israel wants. And usually it's the most right-wing views of Israelis. So this is the power of Christian Zionism in this country.
I think it's an important point to make that Christians United for Israel claims to have 5 million members. To put that into perspective, that's 20 times the number that AIPAC claims to have. So we're talking about a huge and influential lobby. And I know that we say they're pro-Israel, but that feels like a bit of a misnomer, because Christians United for Israel promotes the most right-wing, the most anti-Muslim, the most militaristic, the most expansionistic policies that they can in Israel. And we're seeing that work. We're seeing the U.S. government promoting the most right-wing policies in Israel as well. And I think that it's important that we name the Christian lobby, the Christian pro-Israel lobby, as being a major force in that, both with money as well as with promising votes.
Okay, well, we've reached the end of the hour, so we have to wrap up. But I really do feel like we're only just beginning the conversation. There's just so much more that we need to say and learn about the topic, and actually a lot more that we need to do, is what it sounds like. So I'm really excited that there's so much interest generated from the topic here, and I'm so grateful that you two, Jonathan and Jonathan, were willing to come speak with us about this. I really hope we can have you back to do some more. And I will be following up tomorrow with everyone who registered with the recording. And just keep your eyes on your inboxes to see what we come up with next on this topic.
I want to finish with one word, if I may.
Please.
And I think it is very important because Christian Zionists have weaponized the Bible and used it in very concrete political ways. And people of faith, I mean, secular people don't understand Christian Zionists. They think they're off the deep end. They don't even talk to them. They don't know their language. They don't even address them. But anybody who takes their faith seriously, whether you're a Christian, an evangelical, or a Jewish person, you need to take a good look at Christian Zionism and at Christian Zionists and tell them, look, this is not what I believe. This is not what my God teaches me. This is not what my faith wants me to be. My faith, whether Christian or Jewish, you have to tell them. It requires justice. It requires peace. It requires empathy with the other. It requires opposition to hatred. It requires, maybe, I don't know about your faith, but mine requires nonviolence and working for peace and working for justice. So you have to really engage those Christian Zionists and say, look, you claim to be a person of faith. I believe I am a person of faith. This is what my faith is, and your faith is really problematic for me. Your God, as you describe him, cannot really be my understanding of what God is.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you again, seriously, so much to you both for being here with us. I will be in touch. Have a really good rest of your night.
Right.
Yes. Thank you all for joining and for the work that you've already done. As Palestinian Christians and as Palestinians, we really appreciate the allyship of JVP and of all of you, and hope to work with you together in challenging Christian Zionism, something that is a threat and a bane to all of our understandings of our traditions. So thank you again. Thanks for participating in this. Thanks, Samantha, for having us.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.